got a song that says that Ilushka Wakunda, no song, I used to dance by that song when I was just a fella like the Kaw Indians that made that song. I hear the folk boys sing that song. That's true. Here we are. There's no song, Ilushka, there's no song, hey, boy, but thank Almighty God, in my own language, Kaw Indians. So we can't understand, we can't talk, but I'd like to talk to Almighty God, my own language.
Language is how we know ourselves as people. It's how we see, understand, and articulate the world. When Kanza and Nikashinga were forced out of our homelands in Kansas and sent to Oklahoma in 1873, not only were lives lost and relationships severed, we lost ie, voyage, words, breath. The language was forced to sleep. This is a story of Kanza Nikashinga and how Kanza ie wakes up. Anonka. Listen.
God gave us, the creator Wakanda gave us our language, and that's what makes us Kaw.
We were removed from Council Grove, Kansas in 1873. When we picked up our camp, we picked up our fire. They were responsible for keeping that fire lit. And so they kept it alive those 17 days that we walked down here.
When I was a young boy, probably 7 or 8 years old, my grandfather, Gilbert Pepper, would bring me to Oklahoma to spend the summers with my great-grandfather and with my family, and got to stay with my great-grandfather, Ralph Pepper, who was one of the last pure-blood male Kaw Indians. So I would visit his home. He was in his 80s at that point in time, and every once in a while I would be sitting there and he would start speaking this foreign language and talking to himself. I asked my grandfather, I said, you know, great grandpa is out there, he's talking to himself, what is he saying? And my grandfather would say, no, he's speaking Kaw on the porch because he has no one else to speak Kaw to. And so he's not talking to himself, he's talking to God.
But I'd like to talk to Almighty God, my own language.
Over the years, my grandfather, Gilbert Pepper, would tell me stories about being sent to boarding school. So he grew up in a household that spoke fluent Kaw, spoke the language that God gave us. And he was sent to boarding school, and he was forbidden to speak the language just like every other Native kid that was sent to boarding school.
In the 1880s, the United States government required English-only instruction in boarding and residential schools and banned teaching Indigenous students in our native languages. The Commissioner of Indian Affairs claimed Indigenous languages were of no use and detrimental to the cause of their education and civilization. Students were often severely punished for speaking their language.
Our Kanza Nikashinga in the past, history and our traditions and language and stuff like that was lost because we never wrote those things down like people do now. It was all oral traditions and oral history. And after we went to boarding schools and got our language washed out of our mouths and all of those terrible things that happened, we stopped talking. And so the generation like my mom's generation and my grandpa, that's kind of where it faded off.
Through my grandfather, I really learned how devastating the boarding schools were, not only to our language, but the boarding schools would not allow the Native children to practice our cultural lifeways and our religion. So the whole idea of boarding school was to assimilate our kids. They couldn't kill us off another way, so they tried to kill us in another way by taking away our cultural lifeways and our language. And going back to my great grandfather and him sitting on the porch talking to God in our language, I thought, this, we can't lose this. It's almost gone. There's only a few speakers left. Our speakers are gone, but other tribes, the Osages, are our neighbors, and we're very closely related to the Osages. And I thought we could pull from some of the other tribes, the Ponca tribe, also the same language group as the Kaw. We can start to reconstruct our language by working with the other tribes that had similar languages. I worked with a grant writer and submitted a grant to Administration for Native Americans, and a few months later we got a response back and we were rejected. They said, your language is dead and we're not going to fund a dead language. And that made me so angry. I thought, our language isn't dead, it's asleep. It's asleep and we need to wake it up. And like telling us our language was dead is like saying you're dead, your tribe is dead. And I said, no, we're going to do something about this. I had heard about this professor. His name's Bob Rankin. He was at University of Kansas. He was a language professor there. And I heard this story that he, back in the early 70s, he was a graduate student, and then he heard about the Kaw tribe. And we were a very small tribe, and he heard there were 2 fluent speakers left, Ralph Pepper, my great-grandfather, and Maudie Macaulay, or Maudie Rowe, the last female speaker. So he spent a summer or 2 with Maudie Rowe and my great-grandfather Ralph recording the Kaw language, and literally saved our language because he recorded most of the verbs, the conjugations, and all of those things were recorded. So I went up to visit him, and I went with a gentleman named Johnny Ray Macaulay. He was the nephew of Maudie Rowe. He was in his 60s at the time, and he had congestive heart failure. He wasn't in very good health. And he said, Jim, I want to help you get the language program going again. This is really important. I took him with me to Kansas, University of Kansas, and met with Professor Rankin. Sure enough, he had these boxes of these reel-to-reel tapes on a shelf. These were one of the most precious things to our tribe, and he knew how important they were, but he just hadn't done anything with them, And so I said, well, I'm here to do something about this, and I'll make arrangements to find a recording studio in Wichita, and if you can meet us there, you bring the tapes, and we'll meet you there and get these recorded in a digital format.
James Pepper Henry and Kaw Nation citizen Johnny Ray Macaulay, Maud Macaulay Rowe's nephew, successfully recovered the language tapes and brought Kanza home. Shortly after, Johnny Ray died in his home in Ponca City, listening to Kanza.
Ogija, Ayabiche. I went to look for him. Ouija.
Yeah, they found him. He had been listening to the CDs and listening to his aunt's voice, and that's what he said he wanted before he passed away. That was the beginning of us restoring our language.
In the years following the 1997 recovery of the Rankin tapes, there was a slow and steady move toward the revitalization of Kanza.
Hawaii, Jaje Wita Che Miombami, Mahitanga Jaje Wita Che Desiree Storm Brave. I'm the Kaw Nation language director and language teacher. I teach a lot of the Jinga, the Kanza Jinga, the Kaw children and all children. I have a language team that I kind of built. It's called Taje Sage, which means hard wind. and that's because the Kanza people are the wind people, and they work hard at revitalizing their language and speaking their language. When my brother was in kindergarten and I was in first grade, my mom put us into Kanza EA classes, and at that time she was also working for the Kanza EA department under our teacher, Justin McBride, and she signed us up for language classes. We continued those throughout grade school and high school until we graduated. And my brother and I actually competed at that same competition that I take my kids to every year. We competed at the first one there was, and so it's always cool to come back to that and see that it's still going and that kids are still enjoying it like we did. Our teacher, he was a linguist, and the teacher that he worked with was Dr. Bob Rankin from KU. Dr. Rankin worked with my grandma, Maud Rowe, in the early 1970s to preserve our Kanza EA and made our dictionary and our lexicon.
Hiadadache.
What does that mean?
He's chattered.
Okay, to chatter then is
Yeah. Hiadadache.
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 We went to Council Grove in June for the Washunga Days powwow. We spoke there on our Kanza homelands. That was really powerful for our Kanza youth and for our Kanza people that traveled up there to be able to hear that and see that. It's important because when we were removed from Council Grove, that was part of our assimilation process. That was part of taking us from our roots and moved to Washunga, Oklahoma, which is our reservation here. Just from that move, we lost part of our religion, we lost our language, we lost some of our loved ones are up there, and so to come back and speak our language there, I think it really meant something, kind of ties us back to that land, and that we're not gone, we're still here. Some youth, they get lost and maybe they grow up away from here, and by them learning their language and coming back to their roots and things, that helps them. Language is good for your heart and your mind. It keeps you strong. Cry! If you have parents that it's important to your parents, then they're going to make it important to you, and that's probably how our language is going to survive. When you do anything in your culture, if you're Kanza and you go to anything culturally, you're not going to be able to not hear language. Like, language is in the songs, language is used by our cooks, it's used by our families, and it's just been important since the beginning. If you think about it, it wasn't that long ago that powwows and dances and ceremonies and things were taken away from us. Now it's important for this generation to pick that back up and carry that forward so that we're able to stay the Kanza Nikashinga and stay strong.
Both my grandfather and my great-grandfather would tell me the Kaw language was a gift to us from the Creator, and that's something that we need to hold on to, that we need to keep. It's so great to see these young Kaw kids speaking Kaw with each other and teasing people like me who don't know the language very well. And that really, to me, I think it instills a sense of identity to our kids too. I mean, this is something that's unique to us. Nobody else has this. And it's the language that God gave us. It's the language that the Creator made for us and gave to us. And this next generation of kids, the first generation in probably 4 or 5 generations to grow up with the language. And nobody's washing their mouths out with soap. We're encouraging them to speak the language.
Kanza EA program reaches hundreds of Kaw and non-Kaw people and teaches not only language, but also history and culture. There are classes for all ages, a youth language powwow, and Kaw students participate in an Indigenous language fair every year. After waking up, Kanza EA is breathing through her people. Dagochna.